Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Altieri wash processed Panama from Coffea Circulor. There's the container right there. And Coffea Circulor, based out of Arendal, Norway. And this is part 7 of our 24-part KaffeBox Advent Calendar series. We're certainly in for a treat today, as my favorite coffee roaster from the entire Advent calendar has opted for my favorite coffee in the entire world, a washed Panamanian Geisha. So it's safe to say the expectations for this coffee are through the roof. Now, funny enough, I have actually never had one of Coffea Circulor's washed Panamanian Geishas before. We reviewed one of their washed Ecuadorian Geishas earlier this year, and last year they included a natural processed Panamanian Geisha in the Advent calendar, interestingly enough, from this exact same farm. However, since we have never reviewed one of their washed Panamanian Geishas, I am definitely looking forward to discussing this one here today. And again, the way that this works is the notes and tasting wheel are made with the V60. This cup right here is made with the Chemex, and Coffea Circulor does have a brew guide on their website, which is a 15:1 water to coffee ratio, and they suggest between 93 degrees Celsius, 95 degrees Celsius, and I do prefer the higher temperatures when it comes to Coffea Circulor's coffees, so we opted for 95 degrees Celsius. In terms of roast profile, Coffea Circulor definitely roasts on the lighter side of things. This one remains true to the idea of a Nordic light, as this coffee is roasted very light. With all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. First impression, and it was actually quite remarkable right off of the first sip, and I would say that that was actually slightly surprising because typically when you take in the first sip of a Panamanian Geisha, it can sometimes be maybe lacking because it does need to cool down to really increase in the complexity. But the cup was clean and light-bodied right from the start, definitely what you'd expect, but the initial focus was on a wonderfully vibrant stone fruit aspect. And as somebody that really prioritizes and admires stone fruit in coffees, this was a really wonderful start, as it came out wonderfully vibrant, clean, sweet, and very much in line with the fresh stone fruit aspects. And it was in significant abundance. And that was the flavor profile I was picking up the most. There were some things on the front end, there were some things on the back end, but I really honed in on the wonderful stone fruit aspects because they were quite pronounced and lively right off of brew. Very positive first impression in that sense. The cup was complemented as well by a very strong berry component, and it was that beautiful berry component that I think a lot of us remember from natural processed Ethiopian coffees back in the day, back when they were maybe a little bit more clean, but that wonderfully clean blueberry aspect to it because it was a super clean berry and it was also in significant abundance. So having those two factors, two of my favorite factors in all of coffee, that's going to be an exceptional cup. Additional components to it, and probably the second most dominant attribute was very much an herbal and floral citric component to it. So when I first opened this coffee, this was before I even knew what coffee was going to be featured on day 7. I took in the aroma and I immediately assumed, funny enough, that it was going to be a Coffea Circulor coffee because it had a little bit of the similar citric aroma to it that the previous coffee we had reviewed from them had as well. So I was definitely able to pick up on a fair bit of those citric notes, and they actually listed bergamot for both of these coffees, but I would say that bergamot was a lot more in line with this one right here, as the previous one felt a lot more hoppy to me. This one right here definitely had a lot of that herbal citric component to it, very much in line with the listed bergamot. Additional components to this coffee, I did feel a fair bit of the listed honey as well. It definitely felt like a lighter honey, and I felt that a lot more as the cup had cooled down and it was in the finish as well. But this coffee is actually a little tricky because no two sips of this coffee actually tasted the same. There were sometimes I was like, okay, I'm getting a lot of the citrus. Sometimes I'm getting a lot of the berry. Sometimes I'm getting a slight bit of the honey, and most time, especially at the warmer temperatures, I'm getting so much of that stone fruit aspect. And I actually kind of had an idea that when I was going to brew this coffee through the Chemex, the cup might be a little wasted because the Chemex is nowhere near as good. This one's 100% better through the V60, as there's a lot more complexity, there's a lot more depth. The issue I have with the Chemex when it comes to Panamanian Geishas a lot of the time is that it can be a little too delicate and tame. So obviously Panamanian Geishas tend to come out delicate to begin with. So having them be even more light and delicate oftentimes can maybe strip away some of the nicer components to it. This one right here, it seems to focus a lot more on the citric aspects as opposed to the stone fruit, which was one of the main reasons I was enjoying it through the V60 as much as I had. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. All right, and 3 level 5s. So let's go through those real quick. The cleanliness, level 5, unsurprising whatsoever. This is a true level 5, very, very clean cup of coffee. The flavor profiles in are extremely pronounced, and there isn't any sort of additional aspects to it. It's just clarity in a nutshell. Florality, level 5. Yes, and I think I've kind of hinted at the fact that the 2 most prominent factors I was able to get was this kind of floral citric aspect to it. Hence the reason the florality is at that level 5 mark, and then the stone fruit also there at that level 5, which was the fruit component I was experiencing the most. And it could have been maybe a little bit of bias, because once I honed in on that, I really enjoyed it and tried to focus on that, because having that very wonderful fresh stone fruit in a coffee, especially a very super clean coffee, is going to be a wonderful selling point to me. So those 3 things I think all justified at that level 5 mark. But as you can see there, all of the fruits reach a minimum level 4. And we'll start with the berry fruit, because I kind of discussed the berry being that blueberry aspect. Wonderful, absolutely wonderful, very pronounced coffee. I'm just kind of thinking about it as I'm talking through it. But when I was able to get both of those in huge abundance, the stone fruit and the blueberry, it made for an exceptional cup given just how clear it was to begin with. Citrus fruit, level 4, yeah, kind of mentioned the bergamot. It's not my favorite part of coffees, and especially when it is as pronounced as it is, that was maybe the only slight detracting factor if I'm being super nitpicky about this coffee. It's still nice. I appreciated how pronounced it was, and it was maybe a slight bit more complex than just a straightforward, non-defined citric component, something like a lemon. But even then, not necessarily going to be my favorite aspect of the coffee, just a little bit more herbal than perhaps sweet. We still must discuss those 4 at the top. So the finish at a level 4, yeah, it has a pretty even finish. This coffee doesn't have the most lasting finish ever, but even then, just very nice solid finish. The finish was complex at times, because sometimes it did finish off a little bit more like that light honey I previously listed. Sometimes it did have a more citric finish to it. So again, it was one of those things where no 2 sips actually tasted the same. You were getting different finishes within the cup. Sweetness, level 4. Really hard for me to push a coffee all the way up to a level 5 for sweetness, but this one was on the higher side of the level 4. Very, very sweet coffee, and very much in the fruit direction, which is awesome. I love that. And then the acidity, level 4. I think they described something along the lines of roasted for an elegant acidity. And the acidity was very nice, very much complimentary, and given that it was in less abundance than the sweetness, that's something I definitely look for in coffees. So a fair bit of acidity, but nothing too overbearing in any sense. And then I'll just touch on the bitterness at the level 3 mark. That's all from the bergamot. It has a citric bitterness to the cup, so that's nothing negative. It just goes in line with the citric components to it. And then the last thing is the body at level 1. Even brewed through the V60, it was a very light-bodied cup of coffee. Nothing surprising about that at all. So this tasting wheel is a pretty nice representation of what I was getting from this coffee. Very different through the Chemex, but I'm just going to kind of focus on how much I liked it through the V60. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. This was an instant top 10 favorite coffee for me this entire year. Upon that first sip, upon getting those wonderful stone fruits, I immediately knew that this coffee was something special, and it lived up to all of the expectations. And I sometimes say that going into a coffee with extremely high expectations can give you a little bit of a letdown if the coffee does not reach those. And that's happened a lot, not just this year, but throughout my entire time drinking coffee, because there have been a handful of coffees this year that have been great, but honestly just victims of really high expectations. This one wasn't that. This one lived up to all of those expectations, and it's because it had all of my favorite factors in abundance. Great sweetness, great florality, great fruitiness, and then of course the wonderful clarity, and all of those factors combine in a flavor profile that I tend to prefer. That's going to make this one a real winner for me. This coffee was outstanding. I would be really surprised if there's anything else from this advent calendar I enjoy as much as I enjoyed this coffee. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to, Panamanian geisha lovers, of course. Typically, if you're a Panamanian geisha lover, a washed Panamanian geisha lover, then you're looking for the exact same things that I am. The clarity, the sweetness, the florality, and the fruitiness. This one had all of those in abundance, and even by Panamanian geisha standards, I found this one to be on the better side of them in general. So that's kind of the best way I can direct this coffee. If you get an opportunity to try it, would definitely love to know how you feel about it as well. I think for the most part, though, I'll leave this review at that. And again, if you've had the opportunity to try this coffee, we'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Altieri wash processed Panama from Coffea Circulor. Thank you for watching.